When you look at the left today, don't you feel like you're catching a glimpse into Wonderland, some bizarro acid trip of unreality, some nightmare that hopefully one day we'll all just wake up from in this nonsensical world of screaming, shaming, anti-logic, anti-freedom, continuous goalpost-moving madness? Facts don't matter. Logic doesn't matter. Even objective truth doesn't matter anymore. Where does this cancel culture come from? I mean, canceling people? None of this could be any less American. Values of freedom, free speech, right to self-defense, individuality, your own opinions, rather than the opinions of the collective. And what about the Christian values of our society, of forgiveness and redemption? No, you fall, you screw up once, and you've screwed up forever. There is no redemption arc in this insane culture. I open my news feed, YouTube, every article, every video, Elon Musk is buying Twitter and libs melt down. Why? Why is there such fear of free speech if these ideas are so self-evident and robust? Why do you need a safe space? Why is there such a fear of debate? If Elon Musk has achieved nothing else, he's shown leftists the problem with leftism. I mean, you centralize power in the hands of a few. That's the essence of leftism, is centrality. Well, then the problem is you can't always control who those few are. It's not like you're going to have an unbroken string of political successes as well. It's not like that centrality is not going to attract bad actors or those with which you disagree. That's the reason that you destroy the ring of power. Because simply the fact that that centrality exists is too dangerous. And that's why the founders of the American Republic always opted to restrain government everywhere possible and ensure more freedom, more individual choices, more individual liberty. So I kept asking myself, where did this cancel culture come from? It's so diametrically opposed to everything American. It's been called a mind virus or a cancer, or as I've compared it to, temporary insanity or some sort of drug trip. And I ran across a very interesting answer while I was doing some research into John the Baptist. I want to play you a little clip by this YouTuber. His name is Brandon Robbins, and the video is called The Real Reason John the Baptist Was Killed. And he discusses the culture that Jesus lived in, and it's called an honor-shame culture. And as I began to understand this, a lot of what I'm seeing in the modern left began to make a lot more sense.
Well, this is one of those places where understanding the culture and the mindset of the people around Jesus is incredibly helpful. You see, Jesus lived in what's called an honor-shame culture. And in honor-shame culture, actions are determined as right or wrong, not by the individual, but by the community. For instance, if the community had determined that a violent act was necessary, then the person who commits that violent act wouldn't need to feel guilty over that act, even if they really hurt somebody, because they had honored the community. This is because honor-shame cultures are generally collectivist cultures, which means that the needs, priorities, and desires of the community as a whole are what matter most, not the desires of the individual. And let's be honest, right? This is hard for us to understand in most Western cultures since we are so immensely individualistic. But it does explain for us why Jesus is rejected in his hometown. In verse 3, the people of Nazareth refer to Jesus as a carpenter. This means that Jesus' earthly father, Joseph, was also a carpenter, right? It would have been a custom for Joseph to pass down his trade to his son. Now, the Greek word used here is tekton. It can be used to describe a carpenter or a stonemason, or really anyone who works with similar hard materials. Jesus would have been expected to follow in the footsteps of his father. But as we know, he didn't, at least not long term. Yes, Jesus was a tekton, but at some point, Jesus left the family business to go into ministry. Now you might think to yourself, why is that a bad thing? right? Shouldn't Jesus' family have been proud of him for this? I mean, he's going into ministry. But again, this is where Jesus' culture differs from ours. The typical way that someone would become a rabbi would be to go through the Jewish education system. Beit Sefer, Beit Talmud, Beit Midrash. And if you'd actually like to know more about these, you can find a link in the description or right up here.
Nah.
Now, the climax of this educational process would have been studying under a rabbi. And then at the age of 30, the person who had been trained, who had studied under that rabbi, would be ready to become a rabbi himself. But there's no evidence that Jesus ever goes through this process. No evidence that he ever studies under a rabbi. He just suddenly starts his own ministry, teaching things in his own way. And this could have shamed his family. I mean, they would have been looked down upon, criticized by people around them. His shameful behavior would have brought them shame. That's how an honor-shame culture works. And that's why there's such hostility toward Jesus from his family and in his hometown. But there's more. I mean, look at how the crowd refers to Jesus. They call him the son of Mary. They don't call him Joseph's son. They call him Mary's son. Even though we know that Jesus was conceived by the Holy Spirit, as far as the town knows, Mary got pregnant out of wedlock. Joseph adopted Jesus as his son, but this jab shows how the people of this town view Jesus. In their eyes, he's not deserving of this fame and attention. And so Mark tells us that Jesus moves on, away from his hometown. He's astonished by their unbelief, and he just can't stay. So he leaves to go focus on his true family, what he's defined as those who do the will of his Father.
In an honor-shame culture, actions are determined as right or wrong, not by the individual, but by the community. Not truth, but by relativism. Interesting. So cancel culture has its roots in ancient Middle Eastern tribal honor culture. And so I did a little digging into honor culture. It's not something we're really familiar with in the West. You hear about maybe honor killings or something, like those crazy Muslims or whatever. And look at this example in this article here. During my years in Central Asia, I always dreaded being pulled over by a policeman, no matter how much I tried to demonstrate my innocence according to all the traffic rules. The officer usually showed little interest in concepts like guilt, laws, or justice. Then one day I saw a driver who had been pulled over yell out his family name to the policeman. The officer waved him on and even apologized for the inconvenience. The decision came from a different rule book, the cultural code of honor and shame. Westerners frequently gripe about honor-shame cultures, that they don't believe in rules. They do, but most of those rules are unwritten. One of the rules that they point out, one of these unwritten rules, is family defines everything. In collectivist societies, identity is defined by the group you belong to. I could say tribe, or maybe if you have a D after your name. I mean, imagine if Donald Trump had run for president in the 90s. He would have been a Democrat. He's not conservative. And the left would love him. Donald Trump would be held up on a pedestal today had he been our president instead of Bill Clinton. In honor-shame cultures, children are taught from an early age how to bring honor to the family, and people are expected to be loyal to their community even at personal cost. Even if you say things you don't believe, if it's good for the community, even if you know that it's an insane proposition or doesn't make any sense or isn't logical or isn't true, you have to be loyal to the tribe first in an honor-shame culture. Another point they make, social capital fixes anything. In honor-shame cultures, life is a constant quest to develop and manage an intricate network of relationships. The most important asset any person has is his or her reputation. If other people respect and know you, then you can accomplish anything. Problems are solved via relationships. In Western cultures, we call this corruption. It is unfair. It creates castes. Think about Hillary Clinton. What is it she can't get away with? What is it that won't be forgiven? She's pro-war. She said some racial stuff that should have got her in some hot water. She objectively violated the law with a server in her bathroom. And, well, there's a lot of friends of hers having unfortunate ends, but none of that is seen as being problematic whatsoever, because we're not dealing with a Western culture. We're dealing with a different kind of culture. In honor-shame cultures, aggression restores honor. Honor-shame cultures are antagonistic. The response to a encroachment on one's honor is aggression. Screaming, yelling, attacking. Anything. You can harm a person who has treaded across one of these unspoken rules, and it is deemed as acceptable, even though it is clearly illegal. Within the honor-shame culture, it's accepted or even required. This is an interesting one. Words define status. Think he, him, they, them. All this bizarre virtue signaling, these allusions to I'm part of this tribe, that tribe, and this family. Oppressor or oppressed, that simplistic binary lens, which makes no rational sense. But words are tools for defining the social hierarchy. The purpose of language is to communicate honor and maintain relational harmony. The concepts of honesty and truth look very different. Yeah, they don't exist. Western cultures communicate information and facts, while as honor-shame cultures use an indirect communication that prioritizes harmony and status, which to us come across as deceptive, dishonest, or manipulative. The old Gad Sad wrote an interesting article on the pathologies of cultures of honor and shame. At the societal level, this desire to maintain one's honor and avoid shame is at the root of why individuals, groups, if not nations, seldom, if ever, publicly admit to wrongdoing. In Western culture, we value having self-insight and recognizing when you've made an error and accordingly apologizing for it. In cultures of honor and shame, apologies are viewed as shame-inducing and are, as such, to be avoided if possible. This is also why we see apologizing as basically an admission of guilt, an admission of wrongdoing, rather than in a Christian society where you would admit wrong and then repent and follow a redemption arc. Your apology only gives confirmation to your accusers of your guilt, and therefore justification to any retributive action despite any sort of constitutional protections or legal protections that you should have. So the question then becomes, how did our nation of individual liberties and constitutionally protected rights slowly de-evolve back into an honor-shame culture? Could it come from decades and decades of a slow and subtle manipulation and subversion of all of our music, entertainment, media, news, television, and cinema? And when comparing and contrasting these two antithetical cultures, it bears remembering the words, "By your fruits shall ye be known."